Mike stood up abruptly, his face a mix of confusion and anger. "Mama, what do you mean Kiki has her own problems? What aren't you telling me?" Kiki sat frozen, her heart pounding. She thought to herself, "I should have told Mike everything from the beginning. Now he'll be angry and leave me, just like others have." Mama Ada looked bewildered. I thought Mike knew," she stammered. Mr. Akin, Kiki's father, stood up to address the issue. "Let me explain," he said gently. "My daughter has a scar on her face from an accident when she was little." Mama Ada and Mr. James nodded, as it was something obvious to them. Mike, however, looked even more confused and upset. "Scar? What scar?" Mike said, his voice rising. "I've touched Kiki's face. I didn't feel any scar." Kiki stood up, her voice trembling. "Mike, my dear, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to deceive you. I was just scared you'd leave if you knew about my scar." Mike interrupted her, his voice tight with emotion. "Wait, what do you mean? I touched your face and felt nothing unusual." "About that," Kiki replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "When you asked to touch my face, I guided your hand to the right side, where there isn't a scar. The left side of my face has a large scar from my temple to my chin." The room fell silent. Mike stood there, processing this information. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke, his voice filled with hurt and disappointment. "How could you, Kiki? I've been completely open with you from the day we met. I trusted you entirely. And this is how you treat me." Mike's voice cracked with emotion. "I'm so disappointed in you." Without another word, Mike turned and rushed out of the meeting, leaving everyone stunned. His parents called after him, but he was already gone. Kiki fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Mike, please. I'm sorry," she cried out, but it was too late. The elders and Kiki's parents exchanged glances, their faces showing a mix of sympathy and disappointment. The meeting that was supposed to bring everyone together had ended in heartbreak. Mr. Akin knelt beside his daughter, putting a comforting arm around her shoulders. "I am so sorry, my dear." Mama Ada stood up, looking torn between following her son and staying at the meeting. Elder Chidi, one of the Igbo elders, said, "We can continue our discussion another day when tempers have cooled." The other elders nodded in agreement. As people started to disperse, murmuring among themselves, Kiki remained on the ground, her body shaking with sobs. "What have I done?" she whispered to herself. "I've ruined everything." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the meeting ground, the path to understanding and acceptance between their communities now seemed more challenging than ever, complicated by personal hurt and broken trust. Mike stormed into his home, his anger palpable. His parents followed him into the parlor, concern etched on their faces. As soon as they entered, Mike burst out, his voice filled with hurt and frustration. "Why didn't you tell me Kiki was lying to me? Why didn't you tell me she has a scar?" Mama Ada stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "My son, we didn't know. We had no idea that Kiki hadn't told you about her scar. How were we supposed to know she was keeping this from you?" Mike paced back and forth in the parlor, his hands clenched into fists. "I trusted her completely. I thought we shared everything. How could she do this to me?" Mr. James sat down on a wooden stool, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know," he said, stroking his chin, "that girl was quite clever." Mama Ada turned to him, shock evident in her voice. "James, what kind of statement is that?" Mr. James shrugged, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Well, didn't you hear what she said?" She guided his hand to the part of her face without the scar. "That's pretty smart, if you ask me." Papa Mike exclaimed, his voice a mix of disbelief and anger. How can you say that? She lied to me. Mama Ada put a comforting hand on Mike's shoulder. Your father doesn't mean any harm, Mike. He's just... Well, he's not helping, she said, shooting a disapproving look at her husband. Mike shook his head, his anger giving way to confusion and sadness. I don't understand. I thought Kiki was different. I thought she saw past my blindness and accepted me for who I am. But she couldn't even trust me with the truth about herself. Son, Mama Ada said softly, people make mistakes. Sometimes fear makes us do things we regret. James nodded, his tone becoming more serious. Your mother's right, Mike. Mike paused, considering his parents' words. Why would she lie to me? Mr. James conceded, the fear of rejection. That can make someone you care about lie, isn't it? Mike sat down heavily on a chair, his anger deflating. I don't know what to think anymore. I felt like I knew her, but now I'm not sure. Mama Ada sat beside him, taking his hand in hers. Give yourself time, Mike. It's okay to feel hurt and confused, but don't let this one mistake erase all the good times you've shared with Kiki. Mr. James stood up and walked over to his son. You know, Mike, in all my years I've learned one thing. People aren't perfect. We all make mistakes. The question is, are those mistakes big enough to overshadow everything else? Mike was quiet for a long moment, processing his parents' words. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can forgive her. As the family sat in silence, the weight of the day's events hanging over them, they knew that the path forward wouldn't be easy. But perhaps with time and understanding, there might still be hope for Mike and Kiki's relationship. In the Yoruba village, Kiki sat with her parents in her room. The atmosphere was heavy with disappointment and concern. Mr. Akin, Kiki's father, began the conversation, his voice stern but caring. My daughter, he said, leaning forward in his chair, didn't I tell you to be honest with Mike about your scar? I warned you that hiding it could lead to problems like this. Kiki looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. I know, Papa. I was planning to tell him I really was. I was waiting for the right time. I never imagined he'd find out like this. Tears welled up in her eyes as she turned to her mother. Mama, what should I do? Mike is the only man who's ever gotten close to me since the accident. He means so much to me. I can't lose him. Mama Kiki reached out and took her daughter's hand, her voice gentle but firm. I understand how you feel, Kiki. Truly I do. But in situations like this, we need to give it time. We have to allow Mike to make his own decision. You can't force him to love you or accept your condition. Mr. Akin nodded in agreement. Your mother is right, my dear. We must give Mike space to process everything. But he added, his tone becoming more serious, you owe him an apology. A sincere one. You need to apologize for not being truthful with him. Do you understand, Kiki? Kiki nodded sadly, wiping away a tear. Yes, Papa. I know I need to apologize. But what if he doesn't want to see me? What if he never forgives me? Mama Kiki squeezed her daughter's hand. Kiki, listen to me. If Mike truly cares for you, he will find it in his heart to forgive. But you must be patient, and you must be honest from now on, no matter how difficult it may be. Mr. Akin stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the village. After a moment, he turned back to his family. You know, Kiki, your scar has always been a part of you. It's a reminder of your strength, of what you've overcome. If Mike can't see that, then maybe he's not the right person for you. Kiki looked up at her father, a mix of hope and fear in her eyes. But Papa, he's the first person who's ever seen me for who I am, not just my scar. Well, until now, she added with a bitter laugh. Mama Kiki stood up and sat next to her daughter. My dear, that's exactly why you should have trusted him with the truth from the beginning. Real love, real understanding, comes from accepting all parts of a person, the good and the bad, the beautiful and the scarred. You're right, Mama. I see that now. I just hope it's not too late. Mr. Akin came and knelt in front of Kiki, taking her hands in his. It's never too late for honesty, my daughter. Give Mike time, then go to him. Speak from your heart. Show him the strong, beautiful woman we know you are, scars and all. As the family sat together, the weight of the situation hanging over them, Kiki felt a glimmer of hope. She knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to make things right with Mike, to show him the truth of who she was, all of her, without hiding or pretending. Thank you, Mama, Papa, Kiki said, her voice growing stronger. I'll make this right. Somehow I'll make Mike understand. In the days that followed, both Mike and Kiki found themselves trapped in a fog of sadness and regret. For them, these were the longest, most heart-wrenching days they had ever experienced. Mike, desperate for some peace, would sneak down to the stream when he was certain Kiki wouldn't be there. He'd sit by the water, listening to its gentle flow, and lose himself in thoughts about his life and the hardships he had faced. One particularly quiet afternoon, Mike sat with his feet in the cool water, talking to himself softly. Why does everything have to be so hard? First, being blind and feeling like an outcast. Then, finally finding someone who understood me, only to discover it was built on lies. He sighed heavily, picking up a small stone and tossing it into the stream. I thought Kiki was different. I thought she saw me for who I really am. But how can I trust her now? Meanwhile, in the Yoruba village, Kiki threw herself into work at her mother's fabric shop. She hoped that staying busy would keep her mind off Mike, but even the vibrant colors and patterns of the fabrics couldn't distract her from the ache in her heart. As Kiki arranged some new fabrics on a shelf, her mother watched her with concern. Kiki, my dear Mama, Kiki said gently, you folded that same piece of cloth 3 times now. Are you all right? Kiki blinked back tears, forcing a smile. I'm fine, Mama. Just thinking. Her mother came over and put a comforting hand on her shoulder. About Mike. Kiki nodded, unable to speak. After a moment, she whispered, what if he never forgives me, Mama? What if I've lost him forever? Mama Kiki pulled her daughter into a hug. Oh, my sweet girl, give it time. True feelings don't disappear overnight. As the days passed, both Mike and Kiki found themselves caught in a cycle of regret and longing. Mike would often reach for the spot on his wrist where Kiki had tied a small bracelet she had made for him, only to remember he had taken it off in anger. One evening, as Mike sat with his parents at dinner, his father cleared his throat. Son, Mr. James said, his voice unusually gentle, don't you think it's time you talk to Kiki? Mike frowned, pushing his food around his plate. I don't know what to say to her, Papa. I'm still so angry and hurt. Mama Ada reached out and touched Mike's hand. Sometimes, my son, the hardest conversations are the most important ones. You don't have to forgive her right away, but perhaps listening to her might help you understand. Mike nodded slowly, considering his mother's words. As he went to bed that night. The following day, Elder Chidi made his way to the home of James and Mama Ada. He wanted to check on the situation that had unfolded during their last meeting. As he approached, Mr. James opened the door and welcomed him in. Elder Chidi, Mr. James greeted, his voice tinged with respect and a hint of worry. Please come in. Once inside, Elder Chidi settled into a chair in the parlor. I must say, he began, his tone serious, our last encounter wasn't a successful one. Even Elder Emeka has been asking after your family. What's going on? Mr. James opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Mama Ada hurried into the room, wiping her hands on her apron. Ah, Elder Chidi. Good evening, sir, she said, a warm smile on her face despite the tension in her eyes. Elder Chidi returned her smile. Good evening, Mama Ada. Just back from the market, I see. Mama Ada nodded and quickly fetched a glass of fresh palm wine that Mr. James had been saving for himself. She offered it to Elder Chidi, who accepted it with a grateful nod. As they all sat down, the conversation continued. Elder Chidi took a sip of the palm wine and said, "Now, about this situation with Mike and Kiki. What do you think is the best way forward?" Mr. James sighed heavily. "To be honest, Elder, we're at a loss. Mike is still so angry. He feels betrayed not just by Kiki, but by us as well for not telling him about her scar." Mama Ada added, her voice soft with concern, "He barely speaks to us. He spends most of his time alone, thinking. We're worried about him." Elder Chidi nodded thoughtfully. "I see. Well, I believe the only option we have is to really talk to Mike and ask him what he wants. He needs to be part of this decision." Mr. James and Mama Ada exchanged glances, then nodded in agreement. "You're right," Elder Mr. James said. "But he's been so distant. How do we approach him?" Elder Chidi leaned forward, his eyes kind but determined. "Let me speak with him. As an elder, I might be able to offer a perspective he hasn't considered. And remember, Mike is still young. He might make hasty decisions because he's angry, but with guidance, he can learn to see the bigger picture." Mama Ada's eyes lit up with hope. "Oh, Elder Chidi, would you really do that? It would mean so much to us." Elder Chidi smiled warmly. "Of course, my dear. It's my responsibility as an elder to help guide our young ones, especially in matters of the heart." Mr. James stood up, his posture straightening with renewed purpose. "Thank you, Elder. When do you think you could speak with him?" "How about tomorrow?" Elder Chidi suggested. "Give Mike a night to rest, and tell him to come see me tomorrow in my house. Tell him it's important he comes. I'll be expecting him tomorrow, so we can sit and talk, just the two of us." As Elder Chidi prepared to leave, Mama Ada caught his arm gently. "Elder, do you think there's hope for Mike and Kiki?" Elder Chidi patted her hand reassuringly. "There's always hope, Mama Ada. Love is a powerful force, but so is forgiveness. Let's see what Mike has to say, and we'll take it from there." With plans set for the following day, Elder Chidi bid the family goodbye. As he walked home under the setting sun, he pondered the delicate situation. He knew that guiding Mike through this would be crucial, not just for the young man's happiness, but for the future of their two communities. With a determined nod, Elder Chidi resolved to do everything in his power to help Mike see the path forward, whatever that might be. The next day, on a sunny afternoon, Mr. Akin and his wife, Mama Kiki, sat in their living room, deep in conversation about their daughter's predicament. Mr. Akin leaned forward, his brow furrowed with concern. "My dear," he began, his voice heavy with worry, "what do you think is the best solution to this problem we're facing? It's clear our daughter isn't happy, and I can't bear to see her this way." Mama Kiki nodded, her eyes reflecting the same concern. "I see it too, and it breaks my heart. But have you considered going to speak with Mike's parents? Perhaps a conversation between adults could help." Mr. Akin stroked his chin thoughtfully, considering his wife's suggestion. "It's not a bad idea," he admitted. "But you know our two cultures don't always see eye to eye. I'm worried I might cause more harm than good by going to the Igbo community." "Well, you have to try something," Mama Kiki urged gently. "For Kiki's sake." After a moment of contemplation, Mr. Akin nodded. "You're right. I'll go see them. It's worth a try for our daughter's happiness." Meanwhile, Kiki spent most of her days in her room, alternating between crying into her pillow and half-heartedly attempting to read books to distract herself. Nothing seemed to ease the ache in her heart or the constant thoughts of Mike. One afternoon, as Kiki lay on her bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, there was a soft knock at her door. "Kiki, "May I come in?" Mr. Akin's voice called gently. "Yes, Papa," Kiki replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Akin entered and sat on the edge of Kiki's bed. He looked at his daughter with eyes full of love and concern. "My dear," he began, "I've seen how much you've been hurting these past days. It pains me to see you like this." Kiki sat up, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry, Papa. I'm trying to be strong, but..." Mr. Akin held up his hand, stopping her. No, you don't need to apologize. Your feelings are valid, Kiki. That's why I wanted to tell you that I'm planning to go to Mike's family house to talk with his parents." Kiki's eyes widened with surprise and a glimmer of hope. "Really, Papa? You would do that?" Mr. Akin nodded, a small smile on his face. "Of course. You're my daughter, and your happiness means everything to me. I want to see if we can find a way forward, a way to mend this situation." Kiki threw her arms around her father, hugging him tightly. "Thank you, Papa. Thank you so much." Mr. Akin gently pulled away to look her in the eyes. "Now, I can't promise anything, Kiki, but I will do my best to speak with Mike's parents and see what good can come from our conversation. I'll let you know how it goes as soon as I return." Kiki nodded, a small smile, the first in days, appearing on her face. "I understand, Papa. Just knowing you're trying means so much to me." As Mr. Akin left the room, Kiki felt a tiny spark of hope ignite in her heart. She knew the road ahead might still be difficult, but her father's efforts made her feel less alone in her struggle. However, Elder Chidi sat outside his hut with Mike the next morning, the cool evening breeze rustling the leaves around them. He had asked Mike's parents to send the young man to him, knowing that a heart-to-heart conversation was desperately needed. "Mike," Elder Chidi began gently, "what's troubling you, my son? Why do you look so upset?" Mike's face contorted with emotion, tears rolling down his cheeks as he began to speak. "Elder Chidi," he said, his voice quivering, "I'm a blind and lonely young man. I've been mocked, shamed, and embarrassed more times than I can count. It's gotten to the point where I'm no longer shocked by people's cruelty." He paused, taking a shaky breath before continuing. "But with Kiki, it's different. It's so much more painful because I opened my heart to her completely. I've been vulnerable with her, told her things I haven't even shared with my own parents. And yet, she lied to me, played me for a fool." Elder Chidi listened intently, his heart aching for the young man's pain. Mike went on, his voice rising with frustration. "Kiki had countless opportunities to tell me about her scar. But no, she chose to deceive me. What was she thinking? Did she believe I would never find out?" Elder Chidi remained silent, allowing Mike to release his pent-up emotions. Suddenly, Mike's tone changed, becoming softer, almost wistful. "You know what the funniest part is, Elder Chidi?" The elder shook his head. "No, what is it, my son?" "I'm not even angry that Kiki has a scar," Mike admitted. "Nobody's perfect. I'm certainly not perfect. I would love Kiki with or without her scar because I see her for who she truly is. I love her heart, not her physical appearance." Elder Chidi's eyes widened in surprise and admiration. He marveled at the wisdom and maturity in Mike's words. How could this young, blind man be so insightful? "Mike," Elder Chidi said, his voice filled with respect, "I understand you perfectly. I can't even imagine what you've been through with all the mockery, hate, and shame. Yet you've managed to pull through. You've been betrayed by the one you love, but forgiveness is a virtue. Please, I beg you. Let your heart heal and try to forgive her. I'm sure she's learned her lesson." Mike remained silent, his face a mask of sadness and calm. Elder Chidi continued, his voice gentle but persuasive. "You're a strong man, Mike. You've overcome many obstacles in life, and I know you'll overcome this too. Even if you can't forgive her now, will you at least give her a chance to explain herself? I'm sure there's a reason for her actions." Mike didn't respond, lost in thought. "Please, Mike," Elder Chidi pleaded. "Do it for my sake. Talk to Kiki and hear what she has to say." After what seemed like an eternity, Mike finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I cannot promise you anything, Elder Chidi, but I will try to see her and listen to her explanation." Elder Chidi nodded, a small smile of relief on his face. He knew that this was a crucial first step towards healing and reconciliation. As they sat there in the growing darkness, the elder silently prayed that love and understanding would prevail, bringing these two young hearts back together.
Write the word "continue" in the comment section if you want the next part, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed watching. Kindly click the subscribe button, like, comment, and share this video. Watch out for more intriguing and eye-catching videos from your favorite YouTube channel.